The weather forecast never mentioned the storm. By the time Daniel looked up from the trail, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. His 6-year-old daughter tightened her grip on his hand without being asked. His wife pulled their newborn closer beneath her coat. Then the first thunderclap hit the mountains like something breaking loose. Rain followed immediately, not gradually, all at once, the kind of rain that does not fall so much as arrive with intention. The forest trail disappeared beneath rushing water within minutes. Branches snapped overhead. The path back was already gone. Daniel turned in every direction and found nothing except trees and water and the specific darkness of a sky that has decided it is finished being patient. Then through the curtain of rain he saw it. A cabin, old wooden walls, a stone chimney, windows dark, no smoke, no footprints in the mud outside, no sign that anyone had been there in a very long time. Standing completely alone in the forest, as though it had simply always been there, and had simply always been waiting, Daniel pushed the door open. The family stepped inside. None of them knew yet what the cabin was about to give them, or what it was about to ask for in return. If you have ever lost everything and discovered it led you exactly where you were supposed to be, this story is for you. Welcome to Aurora Cinema Fiction. Stay with us. If this story moves you, please subscribe, like, and share. It means everything to this channel. The smell was old pine and cold ash, and something underneath both of those things that Daniel could not name. Not unpleasant. The opposite. The smell of a place that has absorbed decades of people being grateful, simply to be inside it. He swept his flashlight across the room. A rough wooden table, 2 handmade chairs, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed with blankets folded at the foot of it. Firewood stacked beside the hearth with the kind of care that suggested someone had left it there on purpose. Not abandoned in a hurry, prepared. He knelt at the fireplace. The ash was cold and days old. But the wood was dry. After 3 attempts a flame caught, and small orange light began to push back the dark. Elena lowered the baby into a lined basket without waking her. Sophie stopped hiding behind her mother and moved 1 careful step toward the fire. Then another. Then she sat down in front of it and held out her hands, the way children do, when warmth is exactly what they need, and they are not too proud to reach for it. Daniel watched his daughter and felt something he had not felt in months. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. The absence of dread. He walked to the far wall and found what Sophie had already noticed. Carved into one of the thick wooden beams were initials. Dozens of them. Some so old they had blurred into the grain of the wood. Some newer. Beside each set of initials, a date. The earliest was 1931. He traced them with 1 finger. All those people. All those storms. All those separate nights of relief carved into the same beam. Below the lowest carving, someone had written 4 words in letters, almost too faded to read. Storms always end. The phrase had not been carved dramatically. No flourish. No decoration. Just 4 words from someone who had needed to believe them and had wanted whoever came next to have them too. Daniel stood with his hand against the beam for a long time. Outside, the storm pressed against the walls, and the windows held, and the fire continued to do the only thing fire knows how to do. Give light. Give warmth. Ask nothing back. He did not know what woke him. The storm had stopped. He opened his eyes to a silence so complete it had its own texture. The fire had burned to embers. Elena was asleep, with the baby against her chest. Sophie lay beneath 2 wool blankets with her face completely peaceful. He stood carefully and went to the door. The forest outside was unrecognizable from the night before. Every pine needle had been washed clean. Morning light came through the trees in long gold ribbons. Mist moved between the trunks as though the forest were breathing. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He had not stood still and looked at anything beautiful in almost a year. He had been too busy managing the collapse of everything he had spent a decade building. the construction business he had started at 26, the apartment they had saved 4 years to buy. The particular confidence of a man who believed he could provide. All of it gone within 18 months. Not through carelessness. The market had shifted. A contract had fallen through. A loan had come due at the wrong moment. The sequence had been merciless and ordinary, and it had taken everything. Now they were driving to a small mountain village where an old friend had offered him work rebuilding abandoned homes. Not what he had planned, simply what remained. He walked around the cabin. The mud that should have been marked with their footprints from the night before was smooth and unmarked, as though the rain had erased even that evidence of their arrival. Behind the cabin was a vegetable garden, overgrown for years, but the rows still faintly visible beneath the wild growth. Someone had once loved this ground. A wooden bench faced the valley, its paint long gone, but the structure sound. He sat on it. For the first time in 11 months he was not thinking about money or debt or the expression on his wife's face when she was trying not to show him she was afraid. He was just sitting, looking at mountains, breathing cold air. Inside the cabin, Sophie laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the careful small laugh she had developed over the last hard year, as though she understood that joy needed to be rationed. Her real laugh, bright and uncontrolled and spilling out of her the way it used to before everything got heavy. He closed his eyes and listened to it. Elena appeared in the doorway a minute later holding something small. A wooden bird, hand-carved, its wings spread as though caught mid-flight, smooth from years of being held by different hands. On the underside, 3 words carved in letters worn almost to nothing. Keep hope alive. Daniel turned it over, then over again. He could not explain why the words hit him as hard as they did. He had heard more comforting things from better people in worse moments. But something about finding them here, in this place, on this morning after that particular night, made them feel less like a sentiment and more like a direct message from someone who had understood exactly what despair felt like and had decided to leave a reply. He was still holding the bird when they heard the engine. The truck was old and green and came through the trees on what had once been a logging road. The man who climbed out was in his late 70s. Heavy coat, weathered face. The kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from having survived enough that most things no longer surprise you. He stood looking at the cabin for a long time before he looked at them. You spent the night here. It was not a question. Daniel nodded. The storm caught us. The old man looked back at the cabin. It always does. His name was Stefan. He had been born in this cabin in 1947 and had not seen it in 25 years. He walked inside without waiting to be invited, because it was clear the cabin had never truly stopped being his, in the way that places claim people, rather than the other way around. His hands moved across the table, the fireplace, the bookshelf. Not checking for damage. Remembering. His fingers found the beam above the hearth. Found the words carved there. A quiet sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. My mother carved those. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs. During the war, the cabin had sheltered families running from things far worse than rain. His parents had never turned anyone away. His father had always said a roof belongs to whoever needs it most. Then Stefan went quiet, in a specific way. The way people go quiet when they are deciding whether to say the thing they actually came to say. He reached beneath the loose floorboard beside the fireplace, not searching, knowing. His fingers closed around something wrapped in cloth. An old photograph, black and white. A young couple standing in front of this cabin. Between them a little girl no older than Sophie. Stefan's hand was not steady. That's my sister. Elena touched Sophie's shoulder gently. She disappeared during the winter of 1944. His voice was controlled in the way voices are controlled when the grief behind them is very old and very practiced. We searched for weeks. My mother never stopped waiting for her. Sophie looked at the photograph for a long time. Did you find her? Stefan shook his head. Not yet. He looked at Daniel. Until today, this was the last picture we had of her. The cabin was completely quiet. Daniel looked at the photograph. At the little girl. At the cabin behind her. He understood then that they had not simply found shelter from a storm. They had walked into the middle of a story that had been waiting 80 years for someone to finish it. Daniel found it while Stefan was outside, a second loose floorboard near the back wall. His hand went in and found a leather pouch hardened with age tied with a cord that crumbled when he pulled it. Inside was an envelope. The paper had yellowed to the color of old honey. The handwriting on the front was careful and unhurried. For whoever finds this. He brought it to the table. Stefan came back inside and saw it in Daniel's hands. He looked at it for a long moment. I've never seen that before. Should you read it? The old man sat down. No, it wasn't written to me. Daniel unfolded it. The ink had faded, but every word was still legible, as though whoever had written it had pressed hard enough to make it permanent. He read it aloud. If you are holding this letter, then this little cabin has done what it was built to do. It has given someone shelter. Perhaps you arrived frightened, perhaps you arrived with nothing left, perhaps you believe life has taken more from you than it will ever return. If so, you are exactly the person I hoped would one day find these words. My husband and I built this cabin because we believed every traveler deserves one safe place in the world. During the war, strangers became friends beneath this roof. Hungry children became family. Broken hearts found enough peace to keep going one more day. If this cabin has sheltered you, then it has already done everything I ever asked of it. I ask only one thing of you. When someone else's storm arrives, become their shelter. Daniel stopped reading. The room was very still. Elena had her hand over her mouth. Sophie was looking at him with the particular expression children have when they understand something emotionally before they can explain it intellectually. Stefan was looking at the fireplace. My mother. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way people say things that have been true for a long time and have finally found the right moment to be spoken. Those are her words. Daniel looked at the letter. He thought about the year behind him, the shame of the failed business, the careful way Elena never blamed him, the way Sophie had slowly stopped asking for things because she had sensed that asking cost something. He had spent 11 months believing he had become someone with nothing to offer. A woman dead for decades had just told him that was never what mattered. Keep watching, the best part is coming. The drive down took 20 minutes. The village was small enough that the storm had brought everyone outside to repair what it had taken apart. Fences, roofs, paths. Stefan was known by everyone. An elderly woman embraced him the moment she saw him. Within minutes a crowd had gathered. Not because strangers had arrived, because everyone in the village knew the cabin. It had been spoken of for generations, the way certain places are spoken of. Not as buildings, but as presences. An elderly carpenter said he remembered Stefan's mother feeding his family after the flood of 1968. A woman said she had heard her father talk about the soup that was always ready for whoever knocked. One child tugged at Stefan's sleeve and asked if it was true the cabin was still standing. When Stefan said yes, the child looked at the mountains with an expression of pure relief, as though something important had been confirmed. The village mayor stood quietly through all of this. Then he said something that landed in Daniel's chest. We have talked for years about restoring that cabin. Every year there was another reason to wait, another road, another roof, another emergency that was more urgent. He looked at the mountains. Perhaps some places are not preserved because they are old. Perhaps they are preserved because people still need them. One by one, the villagers began to offer what they had. Timber, stone tools, windows, blankets, time. Nobody asked about payment. Nobody mentioned money. Daniel stood in the middle of the square, surrounded by strangers, choosing generosity without being asked for it, and felt something crack open in him. He had spent a year believing that what he had lost was the most important thing he had ever had. Standing here, he understood for the first time that what he had built was never the buildings. It was the capacity to build. and that was the one thing no bad market and no broken contract could ever take. He heard himself speak before he had decided to. "I'm a builder. If you'll have me, I would like to help restore it." The square went quiet. Then the mayor stepped forward and extended his hand. Daniel shook it. He did not know yet that inside the cabin walls there was one more thing waiting to be found. Something that had been hidden for 80 years. Something that would finally give Stefan the answer his family had been carrying like an open wound since 1944. 3 days into the restoration, Daniel's hammer struck something hollow behind one of the interior planks. He and the carpenter removed the boards carefully. Behind them was a narrow compartment no wider than a man's forearm. Inside sat a small metal box covered in rust. The lock had long since disintegrated. Stefan crossed the room and stood looking at it. "I've never seen that either." Inside were 3 things: a leather notebook, a brass key worn smooth with handling, a property document so brittle with age that Stefan unfolded it holding his breath. The land was not owned by a family or a municipality. Across the bottom of the document in handwriting, Daniel now recognized from the letter, the same careful, unhurried script had written one sentence. "This cabin shall never belong to one person. It belongs to every traveler who needs shelter." Stefan closed his eyes briefly. Then Daniel opened the notebook. Every page was filled with names, hundreds of them written over decades. Some entries were a single line: "Stayed one night, safe by morning." Others were longer: "Lost everything in the flood, left with enough hope to start again." Some were just a name and a date, and the word safe. Safe, 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 page after page. Daniel turned slowly through the entries, not rushing, reading each one. A soldier who had sheltered here in 1943. A mother and 4 children in 1951. A young couple whose car had failed on the mountain road in 1967. A rescue team in 1978. A farmer who had lost his livestock to a late frost and had sat in this cabin for one night and written simply, "I came with nothing. I leave with enough." The notebook was not just a record. It was a map of every life this cabin had touched. Every storm it had outlasted. Every person it had held until they were ready to keep going. Daniel looked up at Stefan. The old man was reading over his shoulder. His face had the expression of someone receiving something they had not known they were waiting for. "All these years," Stefan said quietly. "All these people." He reached out and touched one of the pages. Not any entry in particular, just the fact of them. "My mother kept bringing people here her whole life, and she kept writing them down, and I never knew." He straightened slowly. "I thought the cabin was simply where we came from." He looked around the room. At the beam with the carved initials. At the fireplace. At the table. At the walls they were restoring. "It was never where we came from." His voice was barely above a whisper. It was what she spent her whole life building toward. Daniel turned to the final pages and stopped. His hand went still on the page. He looked at Stefan. The old man had not seen it yet. He was still looking at the wall. "Stefan." Something in Daniel's voice made the old man turn immediately. Daniel held out the notebook. Stefan took it. He read the entry. His breathing changed. Winter 1944. A frightened little girl arrived during the snowstorm. She had become separated from her family. She stayed with us for 2 nights until the soldiers passed. Today we reunited her with her parents. Her brother's name was Stefan. The notebook slipped from Stefan's hands before he could stop it. He stood very still, not shaking, not making a sound, simply standing in the middle of the restored cabin, with 80 years of unanswered grief beginning to change shape. His sister had not disappeared. She had been here, in this cabin, safe. Their mother had known. She had written it in the book, and she had kept coming back every spring and every autumn, not out of hope exactly, but out of the particular faithfulness of a woman who had made a promise to herself that she would return to the place where her family had been protected. Stefan looked at Daniel. then at Elena, then at Sophie, who was standing very still in the doorway with her small hands at her sides and the wooden bird held carefully in one fist. He looked at the beam above the fireplace, at his mother's words. Storms always end. He laughed, softly. The way people laugh when something has been true all along and they are only now understanding the full weight of it. She never told me. He bent to pick up the notebook from the floor. He held it against his chest. All those years I thought she kept coming back because she couldn't let go. He looked at the window, at the mountains beyond it. She kept coming back because she already knew. The restoration was finished before the first snow. Fresh cedar shingles on the roof, new shutters, the stone chimney standing straight again. But Stefan had been firm about the interior. The table stayed. The fireplace stayed. The worn floorboards stayed. The beam with the carved initials stayed. The carved words above the hearth stayed. Storms always end. The cabin should feel remembered, he said, not new. On the morning of the gathering, Daniel carved a small wooden plaque and mounted it beside the door. He had thought for a long time about what to write. He had considered something that captured all of it. The storm and the letter, and Stefan's sister, and the notebook full of names, and the deed, and the wooden bird, and the 4 words on its base, and the mayor's speech, and Elena's hand finding his in the dark, and Sophie's laugh returning to her, like something that had simply been misplaced, and never truly gone. In the end, he wrote 2 lines. Welcome. If you need shelter, this place is yours. No names, no ownership, just an open door. Sophie stood beside him looking at the plaque for a long time. Is it ours now? She asked. Daniel thought about the notebook, about all those names, about a deed that had made the same answer official 80 years before anyone thought to ask. It belongs to anyone who needs it, he said. Sophie considered this seriously. Then she nodded. That's better than ours. He looked at his daughter, at this small person who had come through a hard year with her capacity for wonder completely intact. He thought he understood then what the cabin had actually been built to protect. Not just bodies from storms, but the particular human ability to believe that shelter exists. That someone somewhere left the light on. That the door will open. Years passed. Daniel stayed. The work was steady and honest, and he measured his worth by what he built rather than what he earned, and found that to be a more durable kind of satisfaction. Elena opened a small bakery beside the village square, where people came as much for the conversation as for the bread. Sophie grew up asking questions none of her teachers could fully answer, which was the best possible sign. The baby, whose name was Mira, learned to walk on the day they brought her to the cabin for the first time, after the restoration was complete, and nobody commented on the symbolism because some things are better received than explained. Stefan came every spring. He sat on the wooden bench behind the cabin and looked at the valley, and sometimes talked and sometimes did not, and both were equally welcome. The cabin stayed open. People came. Hikers who had lost the trail. Families whose cars had broken down on the mountain road. Rescue teams sheltering during operations. A young woman one January who had been photographing wildlife and had become lost in a storm, and who sat beside the fire shaking, and then slowly stopped shaking, and who before she left the next morning, opened the notebook and wrote 1 sentence beneath hundreds of others. The storm found me. Hope found me first. The notebook filled. A second was placed beside it. Then a third. Daniel read them sometimes in the evenings when the light was good. All those storms. All those people. All those nights when the world had become too large and the cabin had simply been there. Small, wooden, patient, keeping its promise to a woman who had understood something important about the way kindness moves through the world. Not in straight lines, not with announcements, quietly, from hand to hand, generation to generation, arriving in the moment it is needed most, in a form the giver could never have predicted, and the receiver will never forget. One evening, Daniel stood outside the cabin after everyone else had gone. He lit the lantern inside. left bread on the table, checked the firewood. Then he stood in the doorway and looked at the mountains going dark in the last light. He thought about the man he had been when the storm caught them on the trail, the weight he had been carrying, the story he had been telling himself about what he had become. He looked at the cabin, at the light it threw into the trees. Small and steady, and completely indifferent to whether anyone noticed it. He closed the door gently, and walked home through the forest. Behind him, the cabin stood exactly where it had always stood, waiting. The way some things wait, not in hope, in certainty, knowing that another storm is always coming, and that when it arrives, someone will need exactly this. A door that opens, a fire already laid, a place that asks only one thing in return, that one day you become shelter for someone else. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe to Aurora Cinema Fiction. Leave a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from. You might be surprised how many people felt exactly what you just felt. And remember, every story we tell is made with one purpose, to make you feel deeply and remind you that love in all its forms is always worth fighting for.